The tension between India and Pakistan once again occupies the center of international attention. In one of the most critical moments of recent years, the two countries, both with nuclear arsenal, are facing a climb that threatens to break the fragile line between punctual retaliation and open war. It all began with a brutal attack on April 22nd, when 26 Indian tourists were shot dead in the Kashmir region, a massacre that shook Indian public opinion and rekindled, with strength, feelings of revolt and thirst for justice. A few days later, India responded with military force. On the night of May 6th, the government of Nova Delhi authorized a surgical offensive against targets located inside Pakistan. The bombings were carried out under the name of Operation Sibir and, according to the Ministry of Defense of India, were aimed at structures considered planning bases for attacks on Indian soil. The message was clear. The Indian government will not tolerate actions that threaten its population and is willing to act directly against any threat, even if it implies entering enemy territory. According to Indian official sources, the targets were carefully chosen to avoid unnecessary climbing. The attack is designed to reach places linked to extremist groups, not military structures of Pakistan. The offensive hit cities such as Muzaffarabad, Kotli, and Baravapur. The latter would host a mosque associated with a seminar linked to the Jaish-e-Mohammed militant group, an organization already accused of involvement in several previous attacks. The narrative adopted by the Indian government is justice. The Ministry of Defense said it was fulfilling its duty to protect citizens and blame the culprits, while the army issued a note stating that justice is being done. This posture was reinforced by popular support and firm statements by political and military leaders. But it was not long before Pakistan reacted. In National Network, Pakistani Army spokesman General Ahmed Sharif Chaudhry said the country will respond to the attacks and is evaluating the damage suffered. Rhetoric was firm, implying that reprisals were just a matter of time. Shortly thereafter, the Pakistani government confirmed that it has carried out retaliatory attacks, although so far, without disclosing detailed information about the targets affected. This new chapter in the confrontation between the two powers rekindles an ancient and poorly resolved dispute: the question of Kashmir. Most of Muslim region, divided between the two countries and claimed by both, Kashmir has been the scene of 3 wars and countless armed clashes. The attack on tourists served as a trigger to rekindle this dormant conflict, exposing historical wounds that never healed. Initial investigations into the massacre pointed out 3 suspects, 2 of them Pakistanis. India has released spoken portraits and offered rewards, but so far has not presented public evidence that prove a direct connection between Islamabad and the perpetrators of the attack. While India reinforced its internal position with firm speeches and targeted military actions, Pakistan was trying to respond in the same coin, even with some diplomatic care. The Pakistani response to bombing was immediate, but wrapped in confidentiality. Although Islamabad confirmed retaliation, he did not disclose the targets, nor the damage caused. This strategy, according to analysts, can have 2 goals: maintaining the stance of firmness before its population, without scaling the conflict to a point without return, and at the same time sending a clear message that it will not accept Indian actions in its unanswered territory. The mood on the streets of Islamabad and Lahore is of expectation and tension. The Pakistani press treats the theme as an unjustified aggression and reinforces the narrative that the country is being the victim of unfounded accusations by India. At the same time, religious and military leaders gain space, inflammating the nationalist discourse. In the international arena, the eyes of the world turn to the subcontinent. The United States, through Secretary of State Marco Rubio, tried an emergency mediation. They called the leaders from both countries, appealing for restraint and a diplomatic solution. The concern is justifiable. A climb between India and Pakistan is not just a regional conflict. It is a global threat, considering the nuclear power on both sides. Several analysts classify this crisis as the most serious since the 2019 confrontation, when there were also air attacks between the two countries after a suicidal attack in Kashmir. But now, the context is even more delicate. Political leaders face strong internal pressure to act, while the population, tired of years of tensions and sporadic attacks, calls for justice, for answers, for concrete measures. This combination is dangerous. When popular feeling mixes with political nationalism and the power of weapons, the result can be devastating. Internally, India intensified its vigilance. Security forces were sent to the Kashmir region under Indian control. Control posts have multiplied, arrests have been done, and scanning operations are underway in search of suspects by the April massacre. The climate is of tension, almost suffocating. Local residents report fear, distrust, and an increase in police actions. The central government also began reviewing water agreements with Pakistan, threatening to cut or reduce water supply through treaties that regulate shared rivers between the two countries. This measure, although not yet official, has a huge destabilizing potential. Water, in regions such as Punjab and Sindh, is vital to agriculture, and any change in flow can generate humanitarian crisis, hunger, and civil revolt. With this, the scenario becomes increasingly tense. On the one hand, an Indian government that refuses to tolerate new unanswered attacks. On the other, a Pakistan that tries to preserve their sovereignty and maintain their population united in the face of what it considers an external provocation. In the middle, millions of civilians, vulnerable to decisions made in military offices and presidential palaces. And the question that grows every day is, what comes now? The next answer will be only symbolic, or will we have more bombs, more attacks, more deaths? With tension spreading like fire in dry bush, the conflict between India and Pakistan begins to overcome the military field and invade the psychological and the social. Civil populations, both in Indian and Pakistani territory, live under constant anxiety. In Kashmir, the situation is even more delicate. On the one hand, an increasingly intense Indian military presence. On the other, a growing feeling of distrust and revolt among residents. This is not the first time that the region has experienced this kind of pressure. Kashmir has been the scene of numerous bloody disputes. But this time the fear is that there is no more space for diplomatic setbacks. The reports that arrive from the region show a civilian population being pressured on all sides. Young people are approached on the streets, villages are searched, and any sign of connection with extremist groups results in arrests or disappearances. In parallel, Pakistan increases the tone. Although it continues to avoid spreading details about their retaliatory attacks, local press implies that Indian strategic facilities near the border have been shot. Official silence may be hiding a more significant retaliation than imagined, or, on the contrary, an attempt not to expand the crisis. In any case, Islamabad insists that it will not allow Pakistani sovereignty to be violated, and that it will respond with force proportional to any new Indian action. Meanwhile, in the United Nations, the debates intensify. Permanent members of the Security Council demonstrate increasing concern. China, the traditional ally of Pakistan, calls for moderation, but also criticizes Indian attacks. Already Russia tries to stay neutral, but presses for an emergency meeting. And the US, trying to balance itself between its interests with India and the stability of the region, continue with diplomatic phone calls, but without concrete results. The UN, as always, issues concern, appeals to dialogue, but has no real mechanisms to prevent the situation climb. Behind the scenes, diplomats work day and night to find gaps that allow a diplomatic exit. But the signs from governments are ambiguous. On the one hand, Indian leaders speak in justice and national honor. On the other hand, Pakistan requires respect for its territorial integrity and denies any involvement with the attack that gave rise to the crisis. The impasse is almost total, and while diplomats negotiate, the military remains on maximum alert. Troops are mobilized, equipment is displaced, and the Kashmir skies are filled with air surveillance. The risk of direct confrontation between military aircraft is high, and any calculation error can be the trigger of a large-scale war. The history between the two countries is an aggravating factor. India and Pakistan have already crashed 3 wars, most of them by Kashmir, and they all left deep wounds. Each attack, each military operation, each retaliation serves as a fuel for still alive memories in millions of people. Collective trauma accumulates and pushes the population to support harder measures. It is a difficult cycle of violence to break. An attack leads to an answer, which in turn causes more attacks, and so on. And now, with the presence of nuclear weapons on both sides, fear is not just another conventional war, It is a disaster of unimaginable proportions.